Greetings. This presentation covers the Epicor Eclipse Document Imaging Companion product, the general configuration, and basic setup and use. The Document Imaging Companion product can be used really to attach any documentation to Eclipse records, although it is typically used for attaching packing slips and vendor invoices to purchase orders to help reconcile the accounts payable process. It can be used by the credit manager to attach credit applications and contact information to customer records. And the case that I'm most familiar with is attaching proof of deliveries, the shipping tickets that go out with the drivers when we go to do delivery. And we have someone that hopefully works for the customer confirming that the quantities and the materials are correct and signing the bottom of it. And that helps us when there's disputes in billing to confirm that we did actually ship out what we said we did, and someone can confirm that. For some reason that only Epicor understands, all of the configuration programs that are needed for the document indexer can only be accessed through eTerm. And even though you can select them in Solar, all Solar is going to do is automatically start eTerm. So might as well show you in eTerm rather than going through all the way around to go back to eTerm. You'll find the document imaging configuration under System, but of course only if you're a system administrator, otherwise you won't even see this menu. And here's the menu of the various document imaging maintenance functions. Usually the only ones that you really use are the document storage location maintenance and the document profile maintenance. So here's an example of the document storage locations that we have on our system. I'm only providing this information so you have a general idea of what's going on the back end when you run the document imaging application. What you're seeing here are file paths to, in this case, it is a Windows 2012 file shares, and the storage ID names for each file share. What Eclipse recommends in the explanation of all this is that every year you're supposed to create a new file share for the new documents for that year. You leave the old one open for archival purposes and review, but you store the new ones each year, ideally. Unless you have, of course, a very low volume, and then you might skip a couple of years. On the count, you'll see the number of documents that are stored in each file share according to the system. Eclipse recommends that you store no more than about 330,000 documents in each file share at a time. This is a recommendation because Windows file shares get a little wiggy sometimes in displaying and managing that many individual files in one share at a time. The naming system is well, from Eclipse, and their explanation is basically you should have the year and you have a letter briefly describing what's stored in that file share. So P is pick tickets or proof of deliveries, these signed copies that we're talking about, which is what my company primarily uses. D is for miscellaneous documents, which we don't use, but those would have been things like the credit manager's documents or the invoices possibly from the AP department. M are shipping manifests, which my company doesn't use. E is e-sig or signature capture if you have signature capture pads in your operations. We don't. And S, honestly, I don't know. Since that wasn't used, it was discontinued shortly after we started with the system. That one's just a straggler. So the normal operation is whoever set up the Windows file share will know the server name and the name of the share, and they'll set up, of course, the permissions, which would be a username that Eclipse will use and a password to log into that file share. Once you set it up and give it a name, for the year, then you do a test on it, and it'll send and try and write and retrieve a test document to the share to make sure it works. So if things go wonk, your system administrator should go in here and do a test and see what type of, if it fails or succeeds, or what type of time it takes to get in between, and that's how you test this thing. It's pretty much fail-safe. Once you set it, you can pretty much ignore it for the rest of the year. In the T column, you can see this is a status. Anything blank is an active share that you could read and write from. I think the O's are offline, so you can set these to archival or lock them so they're not written or read to anymore. And they also have mechanisms in here for being able to rewrite, erase, or move the documents as necessary. Eclipse suggests that maybe you should move them to DVD or off to a portable hard drive after several years. Since this accumulates so little space, and if you run a distributor, you never know how many years you're going to have to go back to try and pull up a document. It's just been easier for us just to keep every year open so we can go all the way back to 2006 and pull up a document. I would also like to mention, you may have noticed in the network paths, the backslashes are the other way around on this. Don't get too confused by this. You're looking at a Unix system, so the slashes are opposite direction between connecting to a Windows share on a Windows box and connecting to a Windows share from a Linux box. Anyway, the next couple of slides are an example of testing file share and the response you'll get. What you'll do is just move the arrow down to the storage ID of the share that you're wanting to test. Hit Alt-T for test. When it prompts you for host or PC, you're going to tell it host because you're doing a test file share on a host. And then you hit enter. This is what a successful response looks like. If you get a failure, it's typically because you've put in incorrect or expired username and password credentials for the Eclipse host to connect to the file share. Or possibly the file share computer is offline. If you've got a Windows machine that's hosting the file share, usually every couple of months they have to be rebooted or else their performance degrades. If you're using a Linux box running Samba as the file share, if Samba is misconfigured, it may not respond fast enough to a file write operation. And what you'll see on the document imager side is document imager will seem to get jammed up storing documents a certain point in time, and you'll have to not so gracefully back out of it. But otherwise, this is fairly fail-safe, and those are usually the only couple of issues you might have. Document profile maintenance is where we create a profile for each type of document we're going to store and which active file share it's going to be stored to. Here we see an example of the common profiles that you should see on your system. You may have many more, or you may have fewer. This example shows configuration we currently have for the profile pick, and this shows the storage ID and the network path that is actively being used when using this profile to store images. And of course it also shows a count. You can run a test off the share from this direction just like you saw on the other screen. I only give this information so you have some idea of knowing what's going on when you configure the document imaging software. Your system administrator will be doing all of this on the back end if something goes wrong or needs to be changed. Yay, so enough of the background information. Now we're actually going to go through installing and configuring the document indexer. As with all Eclipse client-side applications, it is Windows only. Don't expect them to be writing a Mac version anytime soon. This installs like any other Windows application. Be sure that you either are the system administrator of your Windows PC, or at least you know the administrator password, or else you're going to have problems with the security mechanism. Put anything you like in for username and organization, and I've never seen an instance where you didn't select it to install for every account that may be on this Windows machine. This is a small application, so after you click install, it takes, I think, all of about 15 seconds for it to complete. And yay, we're finished. Wasn't that exciting? When you're done, you should have a document indexer icon on your desktop. If not, then browse your Windows menu and create the shortcut on the desktop, because you'll be using this regularly. When you start the application, it will ask you to select or enter a new name. If it doesn't have one, put one in. You can make it anything. What this is going to do is the indexer saves the default settings under each user, so you may want to create a different name for each type of profile, each type of document you're storing to, or if you've got several people using the same PC that like a slightly different setting. But usually you just have just one username and one user. The first time you go to run the document indexer, it's going to have to pull the profile configuration information from the Eclipse server. It does that by talking through your eTerm session and pulling the information out of Eclipse. So in order for this to work properly, be sure that you're logged into eTerm. Any account will do, but ideally yours, so that the indexer can go ahead and pull the profile information. If you forget this part and you have to do it again after the fact, log in eTerm, do file, and request profiles, and it'll go through that session and pull the information out. It should do this on Solar as well, and document indexer can be configured for Solar. Honestly, don't like the performance. It's a little sluggish. Since this program was written primarily to work with eTerm, it works with eTerm sessions best. After the document indexer pulls the profile information out of your eTerm session, document indexer will helpfully open up with the wrong profile and a view of the wrong storage location, and then you have to take it from there. There are a variety of different scanner configurations you might have in your company. In my case, we use Canon standalone multifunction copiers that are programmed to take the scanned images and store them in a temporary file share, which then is accessible to the Windows machine. And what the indexer is going to do is it's going to allow you to pre-process those stored images that are in the temporary location, separate them out, and then run them through Eclipse, and the Eclipse server will move them from the temporary share into the permanent share. So in order for this to work, your PC is going to need to be able to access this temporary share. Once again, I have no idea what configuration you might have for imaging equipment. You could possibly have a scanner that's attached directly to your PC. You might be using your own PC as the host for the temporary storage location. So, the configuration could be any one of dozens. But in the end, all you need in order for this to work properly is a scanner that's able to convert the stack of documents into a TIFF image format, and that it should be able to create a sequential random number for each stack that you process, because you're going to have unique names on the stacks of documents in order for this to work properly. If all that just sounded like gibberish, don't panic. Just talk to your system administrator. They should know all this stuff in the back end. As you probably have already suspected, us IT folks simply invent words to confound people, very much like doctors, minus the salary, of course. Anyway, since we're going to be configuring this for the proof of delivery processing, the profile in our case here that we'll want to pick is pick. So that's the first thing to do. After we've selected the profile that we're going to use, and now keep in mind for a refresher, the profile represents the type of documents that we're processing, ultimately where they're going to get stored after Eclipse is through processing them. Anyway, so the next thing is we select the options so we can configure how the indexer is going to behave while it's processing documents, and some of the basic stuff on how it's going to view the documents after you've processed them. So here are our general options, and here we see whether we can select whether or not it prompts you for a different user when it starts, whether the indexer is supposed to start in auto or manual mode. You always want it to start in manual mode or else it'll create a hell of a mess. The barcoding options, not necessary. Typically you use the built-in viewer to view images. This is after they're processed. And what you're going to do is you're going to, usually when you run through the scanner, you'll have a stack of 50 or 60 pages that you run through at a time. That'll create one file. Then that one file is unstacked into several separate files, and then Eclipse yanks those and moves them to where they're supposed to be and puts reference information in the Eclipse database. Eclipse does not actually store the documents in the database. All it does is put a indicator, a pointer of where it is stored at, and then moves it over to this file share on this Windows machine. So this is a two-step process. And as you can see towards the bottom, attachment communications, as promised, yes, document indexer can be configured to run in Solar or eTerm. As I said, haven't had the greatest success with the performance on Solar, although it does work. But my preferred is definitely using it in eTerm. In 12 years, I've never had the need to change the annotation configuration. And it's here is a convenience where you can do little markups or rubber stamp the image of the document so you know that it's been processed. But honestly, that's kind of redundant, because if you're in Eclipse and you're able to pull the document up, you know it's been processed. Be that as it may, they've added these little cutesy cute functions in there. You can configure them as you wish. For this demonstration, we're going to configure the document indexer to run on Solar, and we'll go through the whole process using that, and then we'll show the process again in how it looks in eTerm. Here I've set the indexer to view the temporary scan location that I talked about that applies in my company. For your company it may be completely different. As I said, you might be storing this on your local drive on your local PC. You might have different names to your file share. This is an example of the Windows PC is mapped to a drive letter R that goes to a Windows file share on a Windows server with this path name for this share, but yours might be completely different. Once we have the document indexer configured, we can then go to our scanner and start processing the documents. In this case, you're seeing an example of the scanners that we use in my company, which are Canon multifunctions. I've had a great deal of success with these. Not so much with anyone else, most especially not with Xerox, but your mileage may vary depending on such as it is. Not everyone can afford the $17,000 it costs for one of these little units, and I understand that completely. Your proof of delivery documents, since they've been handled by 3 or 4 people before they got to you, are going to need some cleaning up. Pull all the staples out of the things, separate the pages out, or else you'll screw up your scanner and scratch the glass underneath it. If they've been put in the rain and wrinkled or torn the edges and such, clip off the torn edges, smooth them out as best as possible. Typically, you only want to process a stack of 50 at a time. If you try and overfeed the auto feed, you'll probably increase the likelihood of it jamming up, and you're having to do this 3 or 4 or 5 times until you get it right. So you thought you were saving a couple seconds, you added minutes instead. Anyway, so you stick the documents in the top of the hopper, and then you go on to the next step. As a refresher, as we said before, in the case of this type of standalone scanner, it's already been configured by the systems administrator to know where the Windows file share is, the temporary file share, and so it's going to scan the entire stack of documents as one file, as a TIFF file. It's going to give it a random name, so that each stack that I do is going to have a different name to it. It's going to send that to the temporary location, which then I can go to the Windows machine and finish the process. So if you've got different scanners, you're going to have a slightly different process, but basically that's it. If you have a scanner that doesn't support sending documents directly to a file share, then you're probably going to be storing them on your local machine and processing them locally. That's not unusual, and cheaper scanners. Anyway, in this case, on our machines, we tap on the scan and send to get to the configuration that's already been pre-programmed. My model scanners default to PDF format files. Most scanners tend to these days, so of course we'll have to change that. Select TIFF and OK. Here we see the standard TIFF file settings. 300 by 300 DPI and a black and white format usually gives us a file size of about 68 to 72 K per page, which is really good size, good resolution for what we need to do. On our system, we select One Touch to get to the next configuration. Here we select the stored destination that we have named as Citrix. Of course, your company is going to be different. Do a quick review of the settings you've selected. Make sure you haven't made any goofs. Once the destination has been selected, on our system we hit Start, and the wonderful scanner will go ahead and scan through all the pages and then send the file out to the file share, the temporary file share on our server. Unfortunately for my company, the multifunction scanner is sitting 2,000 miles away from where the temporary file share is at, so it takes up to 12 to 15 minutes per file to send it all the way out to where the server is at before we can actually get to the document indexer and process it. So keep that in mind, that you've got to wait a substantial time, in my company anyway. In your company, hopefully you've put your server closer and you don't have these types of delays. Here you see the file that was sent by the scanner to the file share. As I said, there might be in some cases a bit of a delay, so don't rush right to the document indexer after you get through with the scanner and start processing. Even though you see the file there, it may not be through sending it all. I have made mistakes of starting to process this thing and had the document indexer go crazy because, as it turns out, as I said, since our file share is 2,000 miles away from where the scanner is, and it takes so long sometimes, it wasn't through sending the whole file out. So what I thought I saw was a completed file, and it wasn't. So you might want to hit F5 a couple of times and make sure that file size doesn't change, and that will tell you that the file that you're seeing is already sent and complete, and there's not any more that you're waiting for. So we select the file and click on the Unstack icon, and that will take the one file of 50 pages or so and bust it apart into 50 files, and it will delete the original file according to the settings that we set earlier, so that we don't accidentally attach the one file with the 50 pages on top of all separate 50 pages. Once unstacked, we go ahead and put the check mark on Use Barcode, and with your, in this case we're using Solar, with your Solar session open, and it can be in any window, select Auto Attach, and it will shortly start doing its thing. Be sure to take a look at your proof of deliveries and make sure that you do have a barcode on all of them on the upper right hand corner. If they're not, then you need to go be yelling at your system administrators and such, because without those barcodes attached to the documents, nothing's going to work right. Before it attaches, the system's going to bark at you and give you an "Are you sure?" And this is there primarily to jog your memory. Keep in mind, when you go through this process, if you've got several files that are stacks of 50 pages or so, each file needs to be unstacked. You need to confirm that the original file has been deleted and just the separate files that were part of that one file are there. If you don't do that, what happens is, if Eclipse finds a TIFF file that's actually a stack of 50 pages, it's going to look at the first barcode of the first document that was on that stack, and it's going to attach the whole blasted thing to that one sales order, which is a mess and of course useless. So this is here primarily to jog your memory of going, oh yeah, did I unstack all of the files before I do this step. So check that, and then yes. The system will tell you it's attaching. This doesn't stay up long, so if you blink you might miss it. As the system's attaching documents, you're going to see this little window blink by very fast. If you could read in sub-milliseconds, what it would be showing you is what it's renamed the file to at its destination, where it's put the link in the Eclipse system, if it, in a sales order, in a ledger, or whichever. And of course, since it's doing all this automatically, it's not slowing down enough to show you. While you're processing in Solar, you may occasionally get this issue. This is a timing issue because of server configurations, where the machine is at that's running the document indexer and where the server is at that's actually got the file share. Occasionally it'll kind of glitch out because it's looking for a file that it may have already processed and disappeared, and it goes, well, what the heck. Typically, if you just tell it, give it a couple seconds, tell it okay, it'll catch up again. If there is a disruption and you have to okay and or back out, you may get this message that you may lose the attachment. Not normally. Normally what's happened is it's just tripped across something that either it tried to process and disappeared because it was already in the middle of processing it, or it found something that it couldn't figure out how to attach to the appropriate place, and after you back out of this, if you have a few stragglers that you have to manually attach, then you'll do it then. It's not unusual at the end of a scan to have a couple of documents that didn't attach, and that could be for a variety of reasons. Typically, the reasons are either the barcode has been messed up in some way and was unreadable by the system when it went to process, or you've accidentally mixed in garbage documents that didn't have barcodes on them in with your stack, and these are garbage that just need to be deleted. If you have more than a couple of documents that don't attach in a stack of 150 or so that you process, I mean, one or two per 150 is not unusual. If you start seeing 5, 10, 15, then most often the case is you've got your printer that's printing the pick tickets either needs to be repaired because it's putting streaks or not printing clearly enough for the barcode to come out right, or you've got really damaged documents, or possibly on your scanner you've had the resolution set too low. As I said, the TIFF file format 300 by 300 works good. If you start trying to, let's try and make the file size smaller and try and do 75 or 150 or such, you're going to get an awful lot of stuff that doesn't scan. So those are usually the reasons why things don't attach, but don't panic. Your couple of stragglers can be attached manually, and the following is the process. In order to do a manual attachment, first you need to untap the auto attach button and uncheck the use barcode button, or else this won't work right. Double click on the document and it should display in the viewer. Usually the first time you open the viewer, it's going to open up the document in postage stamp size, which is useless, of course. You're not going to be able to read it, so stretch it out, and you'll have to change the viewer settings. If what I said might happen happened, then in the attachment viewer settings, you'll go into the viewer settings and switch it from optimal to precise, and that should at least allow the document to be readable. Once you can read the document, what you want to look at is the sales order number and the generation. You're going to need to type that in manually so you can attach the document. Go to sales order entry, and in the customer order number, go ahead and enter in the order number and generation. Once the order is displayed, and the order can be in view mode, it doesn't have to be in edit mode, then you're ready to attach the document manually. Go back to the viewer window and click on the attach button. And as you saw with the auto attach, the attachment window will pop up, it'll pre-populate, and it'll close back down if everything's working properly. Once documents are processed and attached into Eclipse, when you go into a transaction, and this could be anything, this could be a customer record, this could be a ledger entry, this could be, in this case, a sales order because we're dealing with proof of deliveries that we're processing. You'll see in the upper right-hand corner a little graphic, a little mountain with a sun there, and that's a little icon in Solar is telling you that there are images attached to this transaction that you can view. If you click on that, you'll see the attachments window pop up, and this will show you there might be several pages, right? Because sales orders, proof of deliveries could be 3, 4, 5 pages in length. And of course they might not be in order when they're attached. Anyway, if you select one of them and click on it, it should display. And here we have an attachment that was rendered with the Windows Photo Viewer. For some strange reason, if you're running Windows 10 or above, if there is one at this point, even though you may have selected to use the Document Indexer Viewer, it's going to probably ignore that and just use the Windows Photo Viewer. And that's fine, you can see it just fine. Otherwise, if you're running a Windows 7 or possibly a Windows 8 machine, then you're going to get the Eclipse Viewer. And as I said, you're probably the first time you try it, you're going to get postage stamp size, and you're going to have to change the view mode from optimal to precise so you can actually see it at a size and scale that human beings can read it. Now we're going to go through the same process using the eTerm interface. As I said before, the Document Indexer was written when eTerm was the main interface, so for go figure some reasons it seems to work a little bit less glitchy in eTerm than it does in Solar. But it might just be my imagination. I'm old and tired and we get set in our ways. Anyway, your mileage may vary. Choose the interface that you're most comfortable with. So the only changes necessary in order for the Document Indexer to work in Solar is to go into the settings, and in the lower right hand corner where you see Attachment Communications, you just tell it Solar instead of eTerm, or eTerm instead of Solar, depending on which way you're going. Since the Document Indexer software uses your eTerm or Solar session, whichever one you're using, to piggyback on to do the communications, you have to, in this case, since we're using eTerm, be logged into an eTerm session. Doesn't matter what screen you're in at the time. Usually I just have it sitting in the main window. Just have this running before you run the Document Indexer and do its thing. As before, you start the Document Indexer, you select your username, which is configured for whichever profile that you're going to be using, and all the wonderful things in it. You go ahead and select your file and you unstack it. If you have multiple files representing multiple stacks of 50 pages or so, be sure to unstack all of those large files. You can tell the stacked files from the unstacked ones by just looking at the file size. Obviously something that's 94 or 136K, you're just looking at a single page. If you're looking at something that's 17 megs, you know you're looking at a stack of 50 or so pages or so. So be sure that you've unstacked all of the large files before you go to the next step, or else you might automatically attach an entire stack, which we said was not a good thing to do. Anyway, just a quick eyeball for verification before you go to the next step. As mentioned before, it's going to nag you, are you sure you want to do this? And once again, this was just a reminder to make sure that you have unstacked all of the major files so that you don't accidentally glitch. At this point, of course, select yes. At this point, the attachment indexing window is going to pop in and out of existence very, very fast. For anyone that may be prone to seizures, you might want to turn away for this, because watching this for 5 minutes will definitely make you a little twitchy. Anyway, it should attach without any problems. Occasionally, as with Solar, it may come across one where it kind of gets out of sequence or couldn't read something right, and you'll have to F12 to abort it. And God forbid, if something went really wrong, you may have to hit F12 many, many times. Even though it does warn you that this is, you may lose something, normally you don't, and you'll just have to go back to those documents that just wouldn't attach right and go ahead and do a manual attachment or delete them if they were bad documents. So it's not a big deal, slight nuisance as I said. eTerm is much more reliable with this than I found Solar to be, so it shouldn't glitch very often. In the eTerm interface, the indicator that there is an attachment is in the upper right hand corner like Solar, except instead of a pretty picture, since this is a text mode interface, you're going to see an eye, and that's the indicator that you've got an attachment. If you click on that, then you can view it. There may be multiple documents attached to one particular transaction, so of course this menu will pop up, and you may have to select each one at a time to view before you find the one that you're looking for. So this is the Eclipse attachment viewer in all of its glory. As I said, usually the first time that you go to run this, it thinks that apparently we're ants or something, and so it displays it in optimize mode, which is about the size of my thumbnail. And of course you have to rejigger the settings so it is actually of a size where human beings can read it. Luckily, you only have to do this setting once and then it remembers it, so you click into settings and you're going to want to change the browser settings and the viewer settings. So you've got 3 view and browser settings to select from. I think it defaults to fast, which is the nasty one. Optimized still is readable but kind of grainy. I've never seen a time where people have such slow networks that precise, even though it uses a little bit more bandwidth, doesn't work just fine. If you can wait the half second it takes to render, if you're impatient, well, you might want to change it. But typically, yeah, just setting these to precise gives you a nice readable document when you go to select the image to view. Even though it's probably not strictly necessary if you've set the configuration up correctly to start the document indexer in manual mode, you might want to unselect the auto attach before you go ahead and close the document indexer at the end of your process. We have in the past made mistakes where things weren't quite configured right, scanned several stacks in, and the second we started the document indexer, it grabbed those before we had a chance to unstack them and attach them into the system, which is annoying and makes you feel like an idiot. So probably never happen, but good habit to get into, to just unselect auto attach before you close the document indexer at the end of your process. And this concludes our presentation on the Epicor Eclipse document indexer companion product. I hope this has been useful, or at least not too terribly painful. Thank you for your time, and as always, I am not Scott Zahn.